Hi everybody, and welcome to another one of my amazing school leader interviews. I know you're fired up about them as much as I am, but we're on to episode number 5, and I'm delighted to be in sunny Blackpool with Mr. Stephen Tierney. Hello.
Very welcome.
Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today. We're going to do the same format as what I always do, which is a mixture of personal questions, and then we're going to move on to curriculum, Ofsted, accountability, and a few other things as well.
Sounds good.
So, question number 1. What's the first thing that you grab in the morning?
After alarm clock?
Yeah.
So alarm clock goes off at 6 minutes past 6. No idea why, that's just why I've set it. So that's been the same pattern for 25, 30 years. It's kind of get up, bit of breakfast, usual shower, set off for work about 6:45, here 7:30. It was always great when I was actually the head teacher as opposed to CO, which is a slightly different role, because I'd normally have about half an hour just to get my head together and organised. But first thing grabbed at work is always a coffee. So I don't have a coffee at home. I get to work at 7:30, coffee time.
What happens if you don't have a coffee?
Oh, I'm not nice. I'm not. No. I need a coffee. Either not nice or I'm asleep. It's one of the two.
Yeah. And I mean, this is I suppose we're going through these quite quick fire. But who's your biggest inspiration in life?
Do you know? Because I was listening to some of them, and the biggest inspiration, and I kind of look and I think, I'm not sure I have a singular person. So certainly there's things about family. So that roots round, it's kind of mom, dad, that wider family, my own family now. But people that influence me might be a better kind of thing that I could answer that. So you kind of look at people like, it could be Becky Allen, it could be Dylan Williams, it could be Rob Coe, and all of those, I've kind of read quite a bit of the kind of stuff they put out, and those tend to be influences, but I'm not sure I'd go for an inspiration, which sounds like I should do. I don't.
You don't have to. It's fine. And what do you? So obviously, how long have you been a head for? No.
Well, I became a head here at St Mary's in Blackpool in 2000, and I was head for kind of 13 years of St Mary's. Then I was exec head for a year across 2 schools, Christ the King, which is a primary school, which is now part of the trust, and St Mary's. And then St Cuthbert's, which is the other school in the trust, fell out of favour with Ofsted and got an academy order. So we wrapped the mat around them. So those 3 schools since 2014 have been part of the trust, and that's why I'm CEO now.
Yeah, so it's a big job, and I was going to ask you, what is it that you think the people in your organisations or around you notice about you? What is it that they notice about you?
Gosh, I think so. I think I tend to become, and I think it's an old thing, that kind of the person for wisdom. And part of it isn't always wisdom, part of it is just experience. So when you're new into headship, you hit things for the first time. And they tend to be things like, it could be premises, it could be finance, it could be HR issues. And you just go, I just don't know. And so I think one of the things is that because once you've been ahead for a bit, you tend to hit similar things. Every now and again something new comes up. So they tend to come for you for that experience. So that's probably what I'd look at, that's of benefit to the organisation.
But you think that's what that's what people would notice about you, as in being someone who's approachable? Is that what?
Yeah, it's the ability to approach, the ability to make decisions, it's the ability to have perspectives on things, and kind of that's sort of what they notice. I've just been around a long time here, which is unusual for Blackpool, because normally something's happened, which means that you kind of heads disappear here and everywhere. But yeah, I think that's what they'd notice.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what do you hope they notice? If that's what you think they notice, what do you hope they notice?
I suppose something similar. I kind of look, and I think for all leaders, you've got to ask the question, what value am I adding to the organisation? And I think the thing that I can now bring to the organisation is that significant experience. Some of it is kind of some of the work you do kind of locally, regionally and nationally, which allows you to kind of hear other people, to discuss with other people, to bring that back, so kind of different perspectives and views and ideas about what might happen. So I suppose I hope what they'd see is maybe the first glimmers of wisdom Some really kind of deep thought, and that ability to make good decisions, that ability to kind of judge a situation, the context, and say, right,
Yeah.
this way's west.
Yeah. And this kind of links in, I suppose, but what do you think your biggest weakness or fatal flaw is?
Without it, over my career, it is impatience. Dead simple impatience. And I don't know whether I'm just getting older or just being able to manage it a little bit better. But it's like, oh, come on, how long does it take us to do this? And yet, when a lot of people are moving, it's nowhere near as agile as when you're moving on your own. So there's that thing about, well, you're a teacher, you try things in your classroom, head of department, a few people, deputies, and now is kind of leading across the organisation. But I think that, and I remember once saying to my mum, I don't think I suffer fools gladly, Mum. And she just kind of looked me in the eye and said, son, you don't suffer them at all. And it's that kind of thing it can be a bit of a downside, because I look at people who, got that lovely gentleness with them.
Yeah.
Whereas I think sometimes I have edge.
Yeah.
And so you kind of look and you think, that gentleness.
Yeah, because we're going to come on later to kind of the fair, nice question. I think that's number 8 or 9, would you prefer to be, if you had to choose between the two, is it fair or nice?
It's fair every time. I think nice gets in problems, because I think nice means that you come to situations where you want the other person to be happy. But people tend to be idiosyncratic, and before long, as you've tried to make different people happy, you've set in train a whole series of very, very different decisions, which when you're leading means that there isn't a principle that you're operating to, and that just people then start to see an unfairness. And what nice tried to do actually makes people unhappy in the longer term.
But I suppose my question feeding into that would be, how do you then, if that's your approach, how would you then deal with the repercussions of that in terms of, okay, I've been fair, but the conversation's been difficult, the other person might be upset, maybe the decision I've made has been, controversial or whatever. How do you mentally, as a leader, deal with that personally? I mean, different leaders will have different ways of dealing with that.
Yeah.
Do you go away yourself, or do you go around people, or do you, what do you...
I think fair and nice aren't necessarily polar opposites.
Of course. You can have a bit of both.
So you can nice, the opposite would be unpleasant.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a false dichotomy, but I mean, for the sake of the question...
We love a bit of a dichotomy. We're social media.
Absolutely love it.
So I kind of look at it in terms of it. I think that fairness, people will, as long as it is genuinely just and not idiosyncratic nonsense, that you're making things up as you go along, and actually, justice today for you is this, but I'll make a totally opposite. There's got to be that semblance of people understanding an organisation that has a bit of stability, and that various things are allowed. So I can think over years that a member of staff might come to me and say, it's my child's first day at school, can I take them tomorrow? And you think, oh God, yeah, you should be at work, but they'll never be a first. Yeah, of course you can. Now, by the time I was leaving headship, people would be coming, because my line used to be, always make it easy for me to say yes. The class is out, they'll be fine, or it could be a nativity play, or it could be things that aren't necessarily covered by teachers' rules and conditions, where you've got to actually start dealing with humanity, with all its messiness and with all its little kind of wants and desires that are perfectly reasonable within a job, particularly if it's going to have longevity. Losing too many people because of the lack of humanity in the kind of the rule book.
Yeah.
And actually some people going way beyond rule book to kind of draconian nonsense. These were supposed to be short, weren't they? it's never a short conversation with me. Next one.
That's not true. I like it. What is your... So, only in fairness, I've asked you your biggest flaw or weakness. So what's your biggest strength? Is it the same thing? Is it being...
There is a temptation. I actually, sometimes when I'm talking about leadership, say your biggest weakness is actually your biggest strength, and vice versa. It's just how you use them. So at times when you need things to be right and very quickly, that impatience is kind of like a real usefulness. So part of it is just kind of the context in which you use it and managing the behaviour.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I've also been able to do over time is kind of see how things might connect. And one of the problems is sometimes they connect in my head, but I'm not necessarily communicated it to everybody else. But it's you can look, you just walking around the school, a primary and secondary together on one site, the curriculum work we can do, but we keep them as two separate schools.
Yeah.
Why? Because if you don't, then you actually lose a lump sum. So it's ability to kind of connect towards a vision and say, okay, this might be the way that we go. So I think that possibly could be something I do quite well in terms of trying to keep things coherent and whole.
Together. Okay. Comfortable silences or non-stop conversation?
Comfortable silences. Yeah, comfortable. I'm all right with a bit of silence, and it's eventually I got okay with a bit of silence in the classroom. The 0.3 second response. No, I could wait, and I don't mind people thinking, and I don't mind kind of people just stopping and sitting and just being with each other. You don't always need to be.
But you don't feel uncomfortable personally if it's a no. Yeah.
As long as it's a comfortable, and I think that partly comes as you know people. So early doors you kind of want to keep the conversation going, but after that you're comfortable.
I've actually that's all the kind of quick fire ones out of the way. So you've survived that. We're now on to kind of teaching, leadership, and other stuff. What's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you as a teacher, as a classroom teacher?
I think
leader.
I think that one I'd go back, and this shows you how long it is in history. If people don't know what dictation is, dictation used to be where you used to walk around a class speaking things and pupils just used to copy them down. So I'm dictating to a class, and I think it was a method in science. It was to do with extraction of chlorophyll from a plant leaf. But I'm switching on gas taps and lighting them. So I'm walking around switching
while
on,
you're dictating.
Whilst I'm dictating. Sorry, let me be clear. I've got a Bunsen burner attached to the gas tap, and I'm lighting the Bunsen burners ready for the experiment. So we're ready to go. And I'm obviously looking over my shoulder, making sure everybody's on task. And I've switched on the wrong gas tap. So I lit it, and there's a huge shoot of flame up my arm, which took all the hairs off my arm. And you know that smell of burning. And you think, God, what did I do? So I just quickly switched off, and I carried on dictating. And I just got no hairs on my arm anymore. And the kids are looking up, because you've got a pungent smell. And so you just dictate a bit faster. Open a window or two, and you got away with it. But I kind of look, and that's probably had the potential to be most embarrassing, because it was just kind of like two arms, two different
but they didn't notice?
No, apart from the smell.
Okay.
The smell gave away.
Yeah.
But that could be.
So you survived?
I survived that.
It could have been embarrassing, but it wasn't quite.
Yeah, it's a story of my professional life, got away with it.
Absolutely. And thinking about your teachers here, and teaching in general, what do you think the hardest thing is about being a teacher?
I think it's the complexity. So I think that kind of Schulman quote where he talks about the only thing I've known like the classroom is an emergency ward at a time of a natural disaster. I've used that umpteen times, and it is so complex, and there are so many moving parts, and so for a young teacher it becomes almost incomprehensible, the complexity. And so the danger there is that we have to start reducing it down to the separate parts for them to make some sense of it. But then it's the same when you break it down, or when you do when somebody tries to do a lesson observation rubric. It's a fundamentally flawed, because it's how they all fit together. So two teachers could do A, B, C and D, but one ends up at Z and the other ends up at F. And there's something about how you merge them. So I think the hardest thing for teachers is just the sheer complexity of what they're doing. 30 different individuals, all with hidden different schemas in their head, all interacting with you in different ways, some on task, some not on task, some coming with different prior knowledge to others, and yet you're trying to get them to an end point. I think it's just complex.
Keeping that in mind, if I was to say to you authentic or genuine teacher well-being, what would that expression mean to you? What would that translate to you as a school leader into?
Yeah, I think there's things that you can do in terms of really determining what's important. A guy called Greg McKeown wrote a book called The Art of Essentialism, and he has a 90% rule that I kind of nicked and converted into, it's not a 9 or a 10 out of 10, it's a no. So we quickly look up to our left, top of the set of objectives, there's 11. 10 of those have been the same objectives since 2015.
Yeah.
They've not changed.
Yeah.
And when we started, the 10, there were about 5 or 6 that we didn't look at in the first year and a few that we didn't look at in the second year. So there's something about doing that which is important and which really matters and focusing on it. That's hard as a leader because you worry you miss something.
So you're saying that for you as a leader, it would be... are you saying this as a teacher? You're saying that as a teacher needs to prioritise objectives for themselves?
I'm starting with the organisation,
right.
If it makes sense.
Yeah.
So in other words, the organisation has got to be asking people to do important things that matter.
Got it.
And too many organisations ask people to do things which just don't matter. It wouldn't matter in a month of Sundays if it never happened. And so the first thing is you've got to sit within a culture where somebody's actually looking at the whole and saying, what do we expect? And then that kind of starts into plans. So the idea that, right, we're going to look at this year. This is also important, but we've decided that we can't look at it till 2021. And this is 2022. And I just wish I'd started 5 years ago, but I didn't, so I am where I am. So managing that. And then looking and saying, so where's the time? So we have 7 inset days a year. At one point we had 9 when we had the kind of massive curriculum development going on both at the primary and the secondary level. At a secondary school, and this has been for 15, 16 years now, it goes back to early headship. Thursday afternoon we always finish half an hour early and we have 2 hours of CPD. We've not always used it well, but we're getting better and better at using it well. A lot of it given over to departments to actually work on things like collaborative planning and to look at kind of what is the kind of the data that they're getting out of the classroom, which is saying what is being taught well because people understand it and what's not. And so I think there's a whole thing there that is structural and organisational. And then actually the wellbeing issue is very, very different. And it changes from teacher to teacher. And it changes over a teacher's career.
Yeah.
So if you're young and single, you might be looking and quite happy to take trips or go on residentials. That actually becomes harder when you have a family, or it becomes harder if your parents are not well, or whatever. So as other commitments, and so teachers' kind of well-being kind of flows and changes. And
changes, yeah.
I know there's things like part-time work that people would want in terms of well-being. Putting aside the argument, could we find the teachers to replace them? Actually, there's some teachers who can't afford to go part-time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's just something I think which is about some real solid structural stuff that a school must do to set a context and a culture. And then I think there's something about responding to the needs of different people at different times. And that's probably somewhere in that mix that we find it.
Do you feel there's a limit within the current system to what you can do as a leader to create authentic teacher well-being, or do you feel you're getting there, and do you feel or do you think it's a commonality that it's not impossible but it's incredibly difficult?
I think it's not impossible, and there is, I would say, the earlier in your career you are as a leader and the more disadvantaged the area you work in, the more difficult it is to manage it. But did I get braver the older I got and the closer to retirement? Yes. I prefer to risk things at a level, and that shouldn't undermine the person who's early in the career with a massive mortgage, a family to support and all the rest. You just think, I can't risk not doing this or not doing that. And that's where you hit the accountability system and the funding system. Yeah. And those are the two things that are playing massive in people's kind of professional lives at the minute, in one way or another, by the way they translate into schools. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And what, I mean, this is again is digging into this idea of teacher well-being and this idea of how teachers work. If you were to look at one area, like for example marking and assessment, in your kind of perfect world, if you like, and in fact I'll read you a tweet that I tweeted yesterday. You may have seen it from a teacher who sent me this message. I've started at a new school. We have to have every page marked every 5 days, including tick and flick. We have 5 lesson plans and PowerPoints given to us with a specified 4-part lesson and 4 levels of differentiation for each task. We have to mark in 2 colour pens and also have homeworks and assessments to mark. It's unsustainable. What are your thoughts on that? Somebody thinks teaching's simple. Somebody thinks that actually by handing out a set of instructions, everything will be okay. So if you start unpacking it, then let's come to marking and assessment.
Yeah.
So if you start unpacking it, basically, here's a load of PowerPoints for you to communicate, because you don't need any understanding of them. You just need, and it's kind of like, no. How do you actually work with pupils to understand the sequencing of the learning, which bit they haven't got, which bit they've misrepresented, what wrong concepts have they got? And that comes from kind of partly experience, but partly from that whole professional debate around your own subject knowledge, but how you turn it into pedagogical content knowledge. How do you do? So just giving people PowerPoints means they have PowerPoints. And where I come from is there is no substantive curriculum development or quality teaching without substantial professional development. The two, you cannot get away from it. But then the tick and flick. I mean, it doesn't take any time, but what is the purpose of that? That's just a totally meaningless thing.
Does that surprise you? Because I've posted two or three, and I mean, for me, it did a little bit, because I thought maybe the last 5 to 10 years we've moved on quite a lot from that. But then
it doesn't, because you hear it too often, and I can also reflect on some stupid things I've done over time. So it's kind of like, it's not that you can just call out other people. You can also look back and think. Oh.
I mean, it's so easy to buy into the current status, whatever the current status is. I mean, when I started 2008, I probably did things that now I'd be like, Tom, what are you doing?
A classic is, for the third consecutive Ofsted report, we got a comment in terms of areas to improve around marking. All right? So you're thinking, I can't have another, they're going to kill me if I get another fourth one. So you bring in this kind of beast of a marking scheme.
Yeah.
That even before 12 months of implementation had fallen over. Yeah. And what I'd say is the staff here were brilliant because they actually tried to implement it.
Yeah.
It was totally worthless exercise, but they tried to implement it. So it did actually prove, even with the best will in the world, it was a fundamentally stupid idea. And so we unpicked it, and we just thought, all right, that's not the way. And reading something called Leverage Leadership, which is really interesting around the data.
Leverage Leadership, really interesting book. And you read to the end of the first chapter, it says, have a look at these questions, and if you can't kind of answer them saying you're doing it really well, stop reading. There's no point going any further. And what they're essentially looking at is, well, if you want pupils to learn that, what have they actually learned? Is there any match between I have taught and they have learned? And so what we kind of started getting, along with some of the work around Dylan Williams, who had done principled assessment design, is we don't need the data garbage of pretending that children are, and you hear it now, this year 7 child is a year 7 grade 7 GCSE. Well, that's just garbage, absolute garbage. What we really want to know is, what is it in terms of the curriculum that we want them to know, and do they know it? And you leave it as what's described as disaggregated. So the vast overwhelming majority of our data is useless to me because it doesn't go into a nice easy number or percentage, but is valuable to the teacher because they taught this and the pupils have learnt that, and there's gaps that some pupils have, and there's things which haven't gone well in class. Is that I've taught that badly, but your class all knew it, so what the hell did you do? Or has it gone well for nobody? Right, let's have a look at the scheme of learning. And then we punctuate that with some standardised assessments over time. So we use GL, but there's others out there in terms of FFT Data Lab use some, there's some which is CM Durham, just to say, okay, well, we're teaching what we think is a challenging curriculum, we're seeing which bits our children have and haven't got, but what we do need to do is we just need to benchmark their progress against all children nationally, and the only way we can do that for all its imperfections of the standardised test is to actually have a look at how they're doing within a national profile, which is all Key Stage 2 SATs and GCSE. Which brings me nicely on to my next question, in inverted commas. I'm going to present you with a quote. Teachers shouldn't be accountable for student results. In quotes, to what extent do you agree or believe that?
To an extent. So, I've ever told you about the free school I'm opening?
No.
All right, I'm opening a free school. It's not got through DFE yet.
Okay.
You fancy a job? What it is, it's a free school for Chinese girls.
It's real, always real.
We are live, and that's dinner time. Watch me Twitch. It's a school for Chinese girls from affluent backgrounds who came to England when they were about 8 or 9 with no English.
Okay.
And what do you think the results are going to be?
Astronomically good.
They're going to be out of this world.
They're going to be astronomically good.
And the leadership strategy is golf. I'm going to play golf, and I'm just going to let them get on with it. And so what you start unpicking there is there are a set of factors that are beyond the control of teachers, which means that making teachers wholly accountable for results has a fundamental flaw that actually is damaging the system. And you can see where it's damaging the system in some of the areas where you've got the long-term disadvantage, particularly white British. So the white British long-term disadvantage.
Yes.
And yet, actually, we do teach them. So there is an element of responsibility that we should take first of all, and an element of accountability. But the system at the minute wants to hold schools and teachers accountable for things that they have limited control over, which isn't actually a sensible thing to do.
And do you think, and we're going to touch on this later again, but do you think that the new Ofsted framework changes that in any way, or do you think that it is the same fundamental issues which you've blogged extensively about, and so have I, that have existed prior to the new framework? Do you think those issues with judging schools on results or having a very, a data-driven focus in the gradings, do you think that's going to go away with the new framework?
No, I mean, it's an easy one, isn't it? And we've read the blog, the answer's going to be no. I think the problem that Ofsted will always experience is, I think it's a fundamentally flawed concept as the way it's actually being run. And part of that is, to what extent can you hold schools accountable for that which they have limited control over? And what is reasonable? And putting it down to a single grade, it's just more of that data garbage. It's basically a grade about your intake. And so I don't think, with the best will in the world, will it have much impact. And part of it is, I think there's something about, in terms of when you're thinking about this, in terms of generalities, I think there's something about domain, and I think there's something about context. So in terms of, I think, domain, you're kind of looking at an educational domain, and it's looking across things like schools, FEs, childminders, same framework for them all. Does that pass the common sense test for you, or does that just seem a bit silly?
Yeah.
And then you've got context, and I just think there's too few people with context knowledge of deeply disadvantaged communities to understand the impact of significant numbers of children coming with limited speech, language and communication, social and personal skills which might be behind their more affluent peers, and what impact that might have on your curriculum, and why there might need to be more time on literacy and numeracy, but also social and personal skills early on, which influences how the curriculum evolves. And it's that lack of context knowledge that I think will mean that this framework won't be any different to the frameworks that have gone before. It's got some positive things about it. And it's not that people aren't trying hard, but I just think the concept that Ofsted of an inspection system down to a single grade across the whole of England on very, very different education organisations is flawed. And I don't actually think you improve things just by inspecting them, which has become our school improvement model.
Absolutely. And would you take out, presumably from what you've just said, the first thing you would do if you were Education Secretary would be to take out the grades?
The first thing I would do is I would take out the grades. I've chatted to various people at a national level who disagree around whether you have to have an overall grade. So I'd get my lawyers on that. But heads round table, Worthless both said, why do you need to grade the individual sections? So take out the individual grades. But then there's a question about, which I think goes deeper, which is about, as a regulator, let's stop and let's fundamentally think, what can you do? And you can do it with some reliability and some validity. And what do we need you to do from that? So in other words, I don't believe that Labour are going to get rid of Ofsted in the way some people think. I think what we're going to have is Nessie, and just hope it's not a monster. So it's going to be the National Education Service for Schools Inspectorate of Education, Nessie. There it is. Put it out there. And they got asked the question, so what could they do? Because some of the work that a regulator does at this minute around Ofsted, around safeguarding and illegal schools and unregistered schools, I think that is very, very important.
My view, just to throw it in there, would be to keep that element, and then I'll ask you what you think, but would be to keep the safeguarding element, but to then have something more peer-led. And I know that that some people, understandably, would say that wouldn't work because then you'd end up with friends judging friends or whatever. But once you see, I just think we need a massive reset to say, hang on a minute, why are we judging like this? What are we judging? Why are we doing it the way we're doing it?
Can we judge it?
Can we judge it
on the
absolutely
basis? And so if I go back to safeguarding, so my long-held belief is that safeguarding is an audit, not an inspection issue.
Yeah.
So for finance, every single term we have a group of professional auditors come and visit our finances and check. And my finance team might not love it, I love it. Because I can go to bed at night knowing that somebody's come in with external eyes. We actually have, and we've used the local authority for the past 5 years whilst we've been a trust, we have an annual safeguarding audit from the local authority who look at all our policies, who look at our single central record, who look at a number of our practices. And what we've got to do is we've got to build a safeguarding framework, because sadly, the issues that people worry about, I kind of understand at a political level, things like prevent, the extremists. Actually, most of my life is spent around neglect and abuse in its various forms. And we just need to be part of a really strong, secure system. But it's an audit issue. And then you look at Ofsted and you kind of say, okay, and this isn't exclusive. Heads Round Table are thinking about this, but in terms of a peer review system, we're wondering about whether we think that every single team, that there should be HMIs who are seconded out of Ofsted, and an HMI sits on every single quality assurance process as a peer-led review system to actually ensure that it's really high quality, that it's asking the questions. You can't have them flitting in and out because they'll end up back in inspector mode, and that's not what peer review is. But some great work.
I mean, in my Hollywood Disneyland version, I'd probably like to see a HMI team take over a school for a year or two, and vastly improve that grade, Stephen, and make it the school that they would like.
But that's the difficulty. I won't defend Ofsted because I think it's a great idea, but that's not what you'd want an inspector to do. But there's kind of a little bit what goes around comes around. I know, I understand that, but I don't think we've really thought through sufficiently what it is a regulator can and can't do.
Yeah.
But the bigger question we haven't thought about is, how do we improve schools?
Yeah, of course.
Because there's a place for some kind of regulation, but we actually haven't got a school improvement strategy. Michael Gove and people are going to be throwing things. It's a rubbish strategy, but at least they had a strategy. We'd all become academies. It was rubbish, but you could say at least there's a school improvement strategy.
It's just changing the system, isn't it, rather than...
Some academies are really good, some academies aren't. So we had academies in Blackpool that were academised due to an Ofsted inspection.
Yeah.
Then once they'd academised them for becoming a trust, they then had another Ofsted inspection, which is inadequate again. And so it keeps rolling, so that didn't improve it.
How do you feel when you see an Ofsted outstanding banner on the front?
Drives by.
Of the school?
Drives by. Because the head teacher was saying, should we put a banner up? And it's no, they might have snarled.
And I have to verify that there are no banners.
But the problem with the grade is it doesn't tell you enough about the school. It tells you too much about the intake, and one of the most explosive blogs I ever did was one of the laziest. It was actually a local head who had asked Ofsted data team for some information around schools grading by intake. Apologies, this is live, and it was just absolutely explosive. And then kind of the next thing, I put it out on a blog, I went and sat with Kath, had a cup of tea, and I kind of clicked on my phone, and all hell had broken loose on my phone, on my Twitter line, with this, and I think it was kind of like one of the most viewed of the year by a garden mile.
Yeah.
And basically, if you worked in long-term white disadvantaged...
I remember the blog.
you're just goosed. You're just absolutely in dire trouble. Russian Roulette with the Career was another blog, and that was for fallen comrades.
There's a lot of
can look at. Yeah, and so you just kind of look, and so the banner, drive on by.
So when it comes to the worst aberrations, we touched on this earlier in terms of things like whatever. It could be in the area of behaviour, marking and assessment, but a lot of it links to excessive accountability. When we think of the worst aberrations, do you, like a lot of teachers, certainly Ofsted, and I would also add in a lot of Whitehall officials, believe that it's poor leadership that is the heart of those aberrations? Or do you think that it's system pressures that are creating it? I mean, what is your view on that? Do you think poor leadership is the crisis?
No, I've always said that the issue is, it's always an unholy trinity. It is politicians who do things on a whim, and it goes from their guts to their gob and then becomes policy with no real thought or knowledge around the area. And it's not that they're not well-meaning, but it kind of becomes and I've got stories that I won't tell, but things are literally just made up on the spot. Yeah. And that becomes a policy. Yeah. And then you've got a whole system, particularly around the accountability issues. And then you've got leaders making daft decisions. So if you don't kind of break into it somewhere, then you do. But blaming leaders is just kind of a social media thing that's developed because there's fewer medias than there are teachers. But it's a little bit for me like leaders blaming teachers. It's like, if it's not working in your school, you're the leader. If it's not working in your system, you're in charge of the system. You've got to take greater responsibility and stop pretending that it's nothing to do with you. That's just an abdication of responsibility.
And I think there's a lot of that, in my opinion now. I think there's a lot of that going on. It's not, it's them. It's them,
it's not us. It's not us. We don't sack anyone kind of thought. No.
And is there, I mean, I was going to ask you kind of to move away from accountability and Ofsted for a minute. Is there somebody on social media, on Twitter, whose story that you admire or that you feel is worthy of attention for you? Is there one particular person or story?
I find that difficult because I don't think you can separate it from social connections. So in other words, you tend to think of people.
Well, even if it's someone you know through social media.
There's kind of a group of school leaders. So you've kind of got Tom Sherrington, you've got Ross, you've got James Pope, all of whom had that kind of accountability, and at various stages were low, and yet have rebuilt a life for them because they're fundamentally good people and good professionals. Great. And then you can kind of look at other people like, Mary Meyer, Jill Berry, Vivian Poirot, who you just look at the work that they do in terms of things like Women Ed, and that's been a really strong movement for a group of people. And so part of my problem is I end up with people that I know and that I like and that I admire, and that's not the same as the story. But I think there are people who are doing good and are using social media. And so some of them you meet, like Kezia and Helen, are part of the Heads Round Table group, and they were right there at the beginning of Women Ed. So you kind of, you like these people, so you think it's great. Tom, kind of at his lowest, and you kind of look at him now, jetting around the world. People are desperate to hear him talk for reasons he's got so much to offer. Rosenshine is right up there with Michelle Obama's book, and it's just people that you just think, that's great. And Ross the same. James is just setting up something heads for heads.
Yes, seen that. Yeah. So you've got so just to pick up on the theme really is that you have that real sense of empathy with those leaders and heads who've been really damaged by this system and knocked down, and they're trying to come back, and many of them are coming back.
Yeah, they are. And the people who use social media just to do really good work. And there's a whole series of different things. I don't spend as much time on Twitter as people probably imagine, so a lot of my tweets are actually timed. Every now and again.
Scheduled, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of will get on there. But as soon as people start having a go, you just think, It's not, and touch wood. I mean, it probably happened now. I've just said it. I don't think I've ever been trolled. If I have, I've missed it.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
Yeah.
But
I haven't either, Stephen.
Well, that's what we'll be doing tonight. But I kind of look at it and I just think, don't buy.
Yeah, yeah. And coming on back onto this issue of leadership, and particularly thinking about new leaders, where do you think that, because it's an incredibly high pressure environment, so where do you think new leaders go wrong?
I think go wrong is not how I'd frame it. What I look for all new leaders is you need to learn the job, and it is probably one of the most exposed places to do it. So when I was getting it wrong as a teacher, 30 people saw it. When I was getting it wrong as a head, 1,200 people saw it, the pupils, plus 100 staff, plus 800 parents. So it's like 2,000 people can see it. And it kind of led to...
And the media as well.
Oh, God, and the media, yeah. We've been in there for coloured hair and all sorts.
Yeah.
And it's where I look, and my line with my senior leaders is always the same. When you come in and tell me I'm wrong, I'll probably be grumpy and disagree. But the moment you stop trying to help me not look like an idiot is the moment you stop doing your job. Your job is to stop me doing stupid things, and that might require every now and again for you to come in and just speak honestly. It is always private, and go out, because you could be wrong or I could be. Let's leave both open, because we won't know. And so I just think that they don't go. You've just got to gain experience, and like the classroom, it's complex, and you're seeing everything for the first time.
Yeah.
So things that new leaders worry about tend to be finance.
Yeah.
Tend to be HR.
Yeah.
Tend to be things like premises. The HR ones, I always, whenever I'm kind of chatting to somebody, right, have you got the policy out? Right, let's get the policy out, because your policy is what you've agreed about how you will behave.
Yeah.
And what you will do. So you've got to start with that. And it's a hard process, any policy. Whether you're managing sickness absence, or whether you've got disciplinary, or you've got capability. So you don't need to be hard yourself. There's a gentleness. And so I just look in terms of the new leaders, they've got to gather the experience of the job.
So so what you're saying is it's that word again of resilience, of kind of saying, okay, I am going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Probably some bad ones, big ones.
Yeah.
But as long as I'm here at the end of it, that experience will set me off.
Get the team around you. And my worry is that quite a few people are coming through too quickly.
Yeah.
So almost they haven't got the experiences of the classroom to pull on to the extent that they would want. And it's going to become an increasing problem. So the increasing problem is just a demographic. There is a whole load of 50-year-old or 50-plus baby boomers from the 1960s, all reaching retirement. Most of us have a final salary scheme somewhere within our pension locker. And so you've just got that group of people who are going to go out, and then there's this vacuum to pull through, and we're losing too many people early on in the career. Because if you want to improve schools, one thing that we are pretty much certain of worldwide is that if you can keep people into year 3, 4, 5 and 6, they're far better than they were in year 1 and 2. So actually keeping teachers is a really good school improvement strategy.
Yeah, and leaders. And
middle
leaders and the same. Yeah, absolutely. And who has the hardest job in your school? You can't say yourself.
No, it's not myself. I suppose the kind of reason I did there is that I think I haven't done all the jobs. I take the job I don't fancy.
Yeah, go on.
So the job I genuinely don't fancy is cleaner. So I've cleaned Tesco's when I was a lad, and I didn't find it rewarding, and I didn't even have toilets on my round. And if you think about school toilets, they get absolutely hammered.
Yeah.
So I think the job that I'd probably least like is cleaner. I don't think so. Maybe that's the hardest job, and the pay. And we paid the living wage even when people weren't paying the living. So we always. But it was still not great salary. And it tends to be part-time. So you're not full-time.
Yes.
So it tends to be kind of one of those low-wage jobs.
I don't think anybody would look at the job of cleaning school toilets on a Friday afternoon and think that's
not a good one. That's not a good one. So yeah, I think that's the one. I think that's tough miles.
Yes. And what percentage of you in work is you?
you're going to ask for a figure and I'm going to struggle, so I'll make it up and put a 0 on the end of it. A lot of it. I think a lot of...
Is that because of the school you work in, or is that because of you?
Probably yes and yeah. I always say you bring who you are to leadership. And that's for better or... I bring Stephen to leadership. And there are times that I need to manage Stephen, to not let him get carried away, or this hurry-up thing that he has, or this he's got to be too perfect thing that he can do. But this is fundamentally me. And part of the reason I'm probably in a faith school is because of faith. So this is part of that service.
Yes.
So it's part of, for me, of that call to serve, and that's probably why I've ended up in one of the most disadvantaged places.
How important is your faith in what you do, in a professional capacity?
It becomes root of decision. So, in other words, let's get back to Ofsted. So the substance of education is the curriculum. It's not. The substance of education is humanity. That's the real substance of education, or humanity. And so your view of humanity, which for me is partly rooted in faith, becomes critical. And so, I'll have conversations where people are saying, should we do? And it's kind of like, that they're created in the image.
Yeah.
There is an importance and a respect that we've got to bring to people. And we don't reach perfection. And that I really struggled with till somebody once told me, that's God's job, Steve. You've just got to do your best.
Yeah.
And so that kind of faith dimension I can see, which formed in family, grew, is part of who I am and what I bring. As part of a passion for education. I hope that we could do so much more around social justice with it, but I think there's other things we've got to bring alongside education if we're really going to get social justice. But yeah, an awful lot of what you see is who I am.
Yes, yes. And I suppose the last one is a more kind of light-hearted question, in a way. But with social media, there's a lot of people now producing blogs, and you've got a very successful blog, you've blogged a lot, in my opinion, you've influenced change, you've certainly influenced conversation around change. So what would be your advice to people who are writing, whether that be a blog, a book, in education, teachers who are looking to do that? What's your advice to them in a nugget?
I think it's one of those things. Write about what really interests you, about what floats your boat. Because the reality is it's probably become so saturated now in terms of blogs. It might not get many reads, but at least if you're writing about what you really enjoy, then you'll find it useful.
Yeah.
For me, it ordered my thoughts.
That's interesting.
It actually made me think through. So I'm actually writing at the minute. I'm going to try and write a second book, whether I'll ever get to writing a second book.
I look forward to that.
Well, part of it, I'm doing the one around teaching, and it's the complexity of teaching. So I keep changing the order, because it could go different ways. Because you could say that, then that, then that, or you could do that, and that. And so part of what it did is it really made me stop, settle down, think, order my thoughts.
Yeah.
Write what you like.
Yeah. Do you think there's a limit to how much can be written about teaching? Do you think it's one of those things, because it's so complex, there's always an angle, or there's always a... I think there's an awful lot about cognitive science at the minute. And so I don't know whether we're going to kind of reach saturation point with that. Although I'm going to talk a bit about, or write a bit about cognitive science, what I really want to do is say, what are the repeating themes? So there's something around something William wrote, there's something around something in 2018 that Bausfeld wrote about in 1979, that you've got the solar taxonomy from 82 with Collis and Biggs, you've got cognitive load theory. There's actually a series of things that I'm basically trying to frame and say they're looking at an elephant from a different direction. Yeah. But
it's still an elephant. And so if you actually look at it this way, from these different perspectives, you get a sense of the whole. And actually it's not as complex as we thought to understand it,
initially,
to act it in the classroom.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Stephen, it's been remarkable talking to you, and thanks so much for being so honest as well.
You're welcome.
All right.
Do you want it, Tom?
Thank you.
Going on.